Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host Claire Hancock is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. This week on the podcast, how a Leicester lad went from a garage to a multi-million pound distribution business taking on AO, Currys and John Lewis. And it's budget week. And we're going to run through the predictions out there and what we think about them. Hi everybody, it's Simon here with Finance Director Claire, and this week we're dropping you an extra podcast because it's budget week and we know that the news is going to be absolutely jam-packed this week. So what we're going to do is today we're going to be giving you some predictions on the budget as well as our usual news story and profit cash growth extra. And then on Thursday we're going to be putting out another podcast with some of the budget review for small businesses. So let's start today with today's news story. So this week, the news story that's grabbed my attention is a fantastic business called Marks Electrical. Now, Marks Electrical, I remember very much so because they're originally based in Leicester, where I'm from. And if I go back about 20 years ago when I was a young child, they started with a small single store on a road called King's Road in Leicester. That store I watched as a small boy go from one tiny store to two stores next to each other, to him knocking through to the third store next to that, to by the time I left Leicester about 15 years ago, he pretty much owned an entire road with his signage above it, Marks Electrical. And in essence, he started by simply selling cookers out of his dad's garage. And today he's running one of the most profitable appliances businesses in the UK with an enviable profit margin of 8.1%, which is higher than both AO, Currys and John Lewis. So we've been doing a bit of analysis on this business. And Claire, can you tell us a little bit about what you found out about Marks Electrical? And then we'll talk a little bit about why they are enjoying such good profit margins.
Yeah, so this business, I just pulled up their annual report, their annual accounts on Companies House, and it's free if anybody's got half an hour and doesn't have anything else better to do. They do have a read through because it does make some quite interesting reading. But in 2021, their annual turnover was 56 million, and their last set of accounts published for 2023, they were just shy of 100 million. So they've nearly doubled their business in just 2 years. So it's quite staggering growth that they've achieved, but that has come at some cost actually, because having a little bit of a deeper dive into their numbers, I can see that their gross profit is actually gone from 21% down to 19%. So that actually has a material impact on the profitability that business makes. So if they had been able to maintain their margin at 21%, then they would have had £2 million more profit. So it's really a staggering cost of growth that business is paying.
Yeah. It's amazing, really. I'm just looking at some of the profit margins of the competitors here. So, as I said, they are cited to hold, as of last year, at 8.1% profit margin. So, AO is sitting at 3.7. So, I mean, that's less than half the profit margin, and Currys at 6.2. So, staggering margins for them. And I've read a little bit more about how they're achieving it, and really, it's very much down to their operating model. Very, very clever. And I love stories like this because, especially when I've kind of grown up with it and seen this humble little retail store grow in only 20 years. And I say only 20 years because I do think that it's staggering how big this has grown. And the chap that is still the CEO today is the same guy that sold those cookers from his garage at the time. And he's had to really clearly change his skill base from going to a single retailer selling a few cookers to managing what I would say is a huge national distribution network that he's doing now. And one of the things in the article I thought was really interesting is the tech element to his business, where he's got some amazing algorithms that simply track his competitors' current costs of their appliances and obviously keep them incredibly well priced against them, because this is very much the online appliances model must be very much about whoever's got the cheapest version of that Hotpoint washing machine is the one that's going to grab the business that day. So that's it's really interesting that he's had to sort of build on those skills. So I mean, the area that they really focus on is all about the operating model of the drivers. So for example, they operate from a single base in the UK in Leicester, which is a huge distribution shed in Leicester. And if you take someone like AO, they've got 18 of them around the country.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's interesting what you were just saying there about technology, actually, Simon, because having had a look through the annual report a little bit deeper, and I think this is where it gets really interesting, because you are probably what I would say is a normal entrepreneur. You come from this with a very entrepreneurial mind, and I come from this from a financial background. But looking at their numbers, whilst their GP is actually a little bit higher than, I've compared them to AO actually. I think AO is probably the market leader in this industry. I've got quite a good background in this market actually, because I used to work for BSH, which is Bosch, Siemens, Neff, and Gaggenau home appliances. So I do know a thing or two about moving washing machines and kettles around. But the gross margin for AO is around about 20%. The gross margin for Marks Electrical is around about 20%, but the gross margin for AO is about 15%. So there's a significant difference there when you scale up to be the size of AO and doing more like $1 billion turnover in the year. But I think what's quite impressive about the growth that Marks has seen is that AO's turnover has actually declined over the last couple of years. So it's really interesting that not only have they won market share from some of the big competitors, but they've been able to do it in a profitable way too.
Yeah, well, they've definitely grown their market share, because obviously last year they grew 22%. I think the year before, did you say in the 40s?
Yeah, 44% in 2022 growth year on year. So staggering.
Yeah, staggering, like over 60% over 2 years. £88.9 million is the turnover last year, and the article that I read said that the whole market has shrank. So they are performing very, very well in a shrinking market. It's the operational element that I thought was really, really fascinating as well. As I said, they operate from a single huge distribution network in Leicester. People at AO have 18 of these around the country. Each distribution shed apparently costs between £800,000 and £1 million for someone like AO to run. So that is just a staggering cost saving if you can run that from a single central point. And one of the ways that they do that is by I don't want to say manipulating, because that's the wrong word, but using the driving rules and to their advantage. So, for example, they commit that they can hit 90% of the UK with a next day delivery, and they do that using only 3.5 ton vehicles, which basically don't have tachograph rules around driving hours, but basically can't be driven for more than 11 hours a day by a single man. However, they double man every one of their vehicles so that they can run them for longer. So they run them from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m. on a 4 on 4 off shift with two men, and they get around the rules by saying that the two men obviously they drive for different amounts of time. So I think it's just an amazing use of managing your costs to be able to keep your overhead really, really low.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that though, because I look at that and I think that's quite a significant risk that business is making, because when you look at their profitability, I mean, they've consistently made sort of 5 to 7% profit before tax. And when you compare that to somebody like AO, the thing with these big businesses is these big businesses have these one-off exceptional costs. So they might do restructuring one year, or they might make some acquisitions or significant investments, which really does impact their profit. But when you're looking at AO are making 6-7% net profit as well. So from that perspective, I would actually say what's going on in Marks Electrical, that they seem to be running very I think you would say to the wind when it comes to the ethics in terms of the driver hours, because I understand that they're running 7.5 ton trucks to avoid the tachographs, but there is still a safety element.
Is that morally right?
Yeah, but those rules and regulations are in place for safety purposes, and it's going to take one accident or one mistake or for the probably for the regulations to be tightened, and therefore they would have a business model that just probably simply isn't profitable anymore. So that's the risk that they're taking. And having read through that annual report, they got quite a lengthy risk matrix in there where they look at the significant risks facing their business and how they're mitigating. And they actually didn't mention this, and I was quite shocked about that, because this seems to be the reason why their business is so profitable. I work with some logistics companies, and I understand that the cost of having HGV drivers and any truck that needs a tachograph is significant. Not only do you have to have a trained traffic officer in your business to manage that and hold an operator's license, but just also the maintenance costs of the fleet are far greater, because you don't maintain the trucks when they break. You have to maintain those trucks regularly and get them serviced regularly and checked, etc. So from an operational perspective, if something goes wrong, they could have their operational costs go up overnight, and they have no B plan for that, seemingly. And I would argue that maybe that's one of the symptoms of this rapid growth, that they've gone from, 55 million is still a big business. I think probably most of our listeners, and certainly we would love to have a business turning over 55 million. So it's still a big business, but in the difference between a 55 million business and a 100 million business is very significant. And potentially they've grown a bit bigger than their processes, their procedures, and their risk management have allowed.
Yeah, and they're listed on the AIM market, so obviously, that market has much looser regulations and corporate governance than something like the FTSE 250 or the FTSE 100. So as they grow, if they need to list on one of those other stock markets, potentially they're going to have to change the way that they do things, and that tightens the margins even further, and various other things. But I think the point here is, there's a single guy there who started from nothing effectively and is now taking on the likes of AO Currys and John Lewis. I think it's a fantastic achievement, and very, very impressive. He is a humble guy. He still drinks down the same pub with the same mates that he did 20 years ago, from what I read. And I think, hats off to him for continuing to upskill himself through that as he goes. So.
Yeah, I think probably a lasting comment I would make on Marks Electrical is, having had a look at their accounts, they have very low value of fixed assets, which actually is an indicator that this is a business that isn't investing enough in technology and equipment. When you look at some of the pictures they've got on their website, for example, of their warehouse, it doesn't appear that automated. They've still got like man-up trucks and men driving forklift trucks and things like that. And as they're starting to grow and get into the sort of 6-figure million turnovers, they do need to be thinking about how they're going to have these fully automated warehouses, taking advantage of robots and stuff like that. And that is going to come with a significant investment. So they will need to start thinking about how they're going to attract more investment into their business, because to compete with AO and John Lewis and Currys and people like that, they've got to think about automation, and there is a significant cost to that.
Yeah, I'd agree. Shall we move on to this week's deep dive, and we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming budget this week?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is budget week. Yes, Wednesday this week at midday, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt is going to take the stall again to unleash surprises and hopefully some niceties towards small businesses, and hopefully other personal elements as well. So I've been reading the news to see what's been leaked so far on the budget. Obviously, we've got some of the sort of top line elements around income tax in total. So I guess the big debate at the moment is it 1p or is it 2p? Seems to be where we're at.
Yeah, when it comes to income tax being cut. But I don't know. I mean, we're very into politics, aren't we? We one of my favourite programmes is Newsnight.
No,
I'm very into politics. I study politics.
I try to control what I can only control, and politics is not something I can control. Yeah. I don't think that's the right message for business owners as well. Don't get involved in politics. You can't change it, but it's important to be informed on it.
Yeah, I love politics. I think politics and finance are the two things that I'm quite up on. But
you sound riveting.
It's an acquired taste for sure. But they have been talking about cutting the income tax rate. Back when Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, he talked about reducing the income tax rate to 19%. So this has been on the cards for a while. It's not a new thing. But of course, there's been lots of speculation about this. But I feel like they're getting this one wrong. Really, what difference does a couple of pence make in your pocket every month when you're spending hundreds of pounds every blooming week fixing tyres on your car because you've got flat tires going over potholes, and you have to pay to go private at a dentist because you can't get an appointment, and you can't get in at the doctors and get treatments that you need to be able to go to work. And I just feel like this is a really misjudged tax cut. Yeah. And actually they should be holding firm and reinvesting this money where it's needed.
I think this is typical of an election year, and when they cut national insurance last year, I mean, the response from some of my staff was they can keep it. I'd rather they kept it and they cut the waiting lists at the hospital. I'd rather they kept it and they fill the potholes in the road. I think you're absolutely right. I think the sentiment and the tone out there in the general public has been misjudged there a little bit, to think that, taking another penny off, another 2p off income tax is where and what people want. I think actually people want help with the things that are really causing them a problem day to day, and there's a lot out there that's causing people a problem. And I think with small businesses especially, I mean, we talk to a lot of small businesses, and some of the thresholds, I mean, then why are we not talking about thresholds that have been frozen for 10 years, and when inflation's jumped 25% in the last few years? The VAT threshold's a very good example of that, where people feel like they're in a pincer movement over that, and other thresholds that are out there.
Yeah, definitely with the VAT threshold. I mean, the last time the VAT threshold went up actually was April 2017. And if the VAT threshold will continue to climb with inflation, then actually it'll be 108,000 right now. And I've spoken to 3 businesses in the last month alone, 2 of which have said to me that they will not be growing because not only can they not get their head around VAT, but they, if you sell to consumers, it's very difficult to increase your prices 20%. So therefore, that negatively impacts your profit. And I've spoken to another business that's registered for VAT, but they also sell to consumers. They're actually in hair and beauty, and they will be deregistering for VAT because the impact of their profit over the last couple of years has been so negative. So I think, I put a poll out on my Facebook group and in some other channels where I speak to people, and overwhelmingly VAT has got to be the number one thing that small business owners talk about repeatedly, is the VAT threshold is anti-business. And I think it was the FSB also did a poll, and 50% of small business owners that are approaching the VAT threshold say that they will actively try to keep their business under the VAT threshold. So it's just so anti-business and it's anti-growth. And I think that's the problem, is that we could just give businesses that little bit of help and increase the VAT threshold to even if it's 100k. And I think that the extra taxes that business would generate through employing people and paying corporation tax would far offset the VAT cost.
Yeah, I really don't think it's great. It's as I've said, it's very it's anti-growth, and it does put people in a very, very, very difficult position if they're trying to run their small business. So I think there's loads more. I mean, there's not a lot I've read around small business at all, but I think have you read any more, Claire?
Yeah, so one of the the problem is with this government is that they're talking about taxes and they're talking about growth, but we saw in the autumn statement that Jeremy Hunt did when they cut national insurance, and certainly the national insurance cut had barely no impact on me at all. As a company director, as most of our listeners, we don't pay that much insurance. Most of what we pay will be dividend taxes and corporation tax and income tax. So by cutting national insurance, I think the government made quite a statement that actually they are not too concerned about cutting business taxes. They're more concerned about cutting income taxes for workers.
Yeah.
And they keep coming out saying this phrase that work must pay, work must pay. The other thing that Jeremy Hunt has been quite prolific in talking about, if you've ever heard him on podcasts and on TV shows and things like that, is Jeremy Hunt keeps referring to zombie companies. And zombie companies are businesses that bring very little to our economy. They're barely making any profit. They're not growing. They're not being very productive. They haven't got high rates of employment. And Jeremy Hunt's been quite scathing about zombie companies. Now, the reason most of these zombie companies have survived is because we've had historically very low rates of interest. So they've been able to bolster the business with cheap cash. And I get the impression from Jeremy Hunt that they are trying to wheedle out zombie companies from our economy. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but the only way to do that is to keep business taxes and the cost of borrowing for businesses unsustainable, which means that these zombie companies will ultimately go bust. And then the more productive, more profitable businesses that are employing and paying good taxes can then sweep up the marketplace. So I don't actually think we're going to see any business tax cuts at all in the next coming years, to be honest.
That's probably, I mean, it's quite similar to what we talked about last week about the pub profitability and actually forcing some of them out. So do you think that almost that feeling of neglect towards small businesses sometimes is part of a strategic ploy to actually increase productivity? Is that the thoughts on that?
I think that the UK economy it's incredibly easy to start a business in the UK. We've seen the rise of the gig economy in the last few years, but there is a very fine line between what's a business and what's a job. And I think that there are definitely lots of people that are saying that they're running a business when actually they've got a side hustle or they've got a job. And I think controlling those people, making sure that those people continue to pay taxes, and also making sure that they're not just saying that they're self-employed or that they're working through a limited company for tax breaks. I do feel quite strongly that if you're going to get, there are some benefits to running a limited company in terms of paying less tax when you get to a certain size. And I don't think that people should be allowed to run a limited company just to get a tax break. I think ethically, you should just pay your taxes. Don't worry about how much tax you pay, worry about how much income you bring in. Because if you focus on that top line and not how much tax you pay, then you'll always have money in your pocket. But I do know
I feel like we're talking more and more to people who, again, this would really, really hit productivity, but we seem to be talking to more and more people who are almost deliberately capping what they earn. Like you say, trying to run a business, but really they're running a salary for themselves and they're putting this cap on it, or they're doing types of businesses like, from a shed in their home garden. And, we'd like people to pay us cash as much as possible. And that's just like, that is driving tax revenues away. It's driving productivity down, and it's driven by, again, I guess that feeling of unfairness in some of these tax bandings and various other things. So
yeah, and I think the problem with that is that the businesses like our businesses, where we're genuinely trying to grow significant sized businesses, and we want to get our employees to double digits and potentially even sell our businesses one day. When you are trying to do that, you get caught in the crossfire of some of this legislation. A classic example is business rates. From April, business rates are going to go up by 6.7%, unless there's something announced in the budget. And I think retail in particular, this is going to impact a lot, because there's a lot of shops on our high street that are barely getting by. Now, there is an argument of, if these shops are barely getting by, should they be supported with another tax cut to help them survive? Or is it more important to support these business owners to grow a business that is profitable and sustainable? Because you can't prop businesses up with tax cuts. And I think that that's where I have the utmost sympathy for small businesses. And, I'm a massive cheerleader. I regularly write to my MP. He's probably very fed up of hearing from me about what I think is unfair with business taxes in particular. But at the end of the day, if the only reason your business is surviving is because Jeremy Hunt gave you a tax cut, then you don't have a viable business. And I think we need to be focusing much more on supporting business owners from that perspective to build viable businesses.
Yeah. And talking of taxes and making it difficult for smaller businesses, one of the other things that I've read about here is the new vape tax. So they're talking here about levying, this isn't VAT, this is an additional tax on vape liquids, similar to what they do on tobacco. They're also going to be raising tobacco so that vape still remains slightly cheaper to keep people in that. But they're talking about, £1.60 on 10 millilitres liquids. They think that's going to raise £500 million. It's really interesting. It's really timely, because I was only listening a few days ago to another podcast who had a vape owner on it who actually, very, very profitable businesses, these vape shops, very profitable. But again, new regulation was coming. So, what can they do to prepare for that type of thing, Claire?
Yeah, it's very difficult actually when you're in an industry that's quite regulated, because anything like this, when this happens, £1.60 for every 10 millilitres of liquid sold. So that's like one of those small little bottles of vape. And you can only imagine how many of those you've got to sell to be able to keep your shop on the high street. You're going to be selling thousands every month. So that's going to have a very significant impact on your profitability. However, I was actually reading a study about vape shops, and they are thought to be one of the number one sources of money laundering in the UK. So potentially this change in legislation will help wheedle out some of that money laundering as well.
Will it justify why turnovers in those shops should go up even further?
Well, if all of a sudden you're going to be losing £1, because what do these bottles of vape cost? I am very anti-vaping. I absolutely think.
Well, I think that's expensive. I would say that's 10 of the small bottles, 10 for £20, something like that. So
about £2 each.
What's that a bottle? £2 each, and they're going to put £1.60 tax on each
one.
I mean, it's pretty significant.
So you're going to have to double your price overnight. So
you're going to have to, yeah.
I think
so that's going to ramp that right up.
Yeah. So you're going to have to double the price overnight. But this is dirty money that's come from nowhere. So all of a sudden they're getting 50% less output from their money laundering.
Or whoa! There we can't
if you were money laundering, no, of course there are some absolutely viable, legitimate vape shops. But yeah, it's like phone shops as well,
and sweet shops on Oxford Street.
Sweet shops on Oxford Street. So they're very, very difficult. For HMRC to manage. But yeah, I mean, this is incredibly difficult. It's almost like the same challenge that's facing business owners with the VAT threshold is you've got no choice because they're consumers. Are you going to be able to double your costs overnight, or are you going to have to take some of the hit and have a cut on your profitability? And that's the really, really difficult question that these vape shop these vape shop owners have now got to do. They've got to crunch the numbers and see whether they've got a viable business.
Yeah, what would you do if you owned a vape shop next? What would be your decision? Would you simply slap the tax on, knowing that it's a well publicized tax, or would you absorb it? What would you do?
I think the problem with vape shops is it's a big jump. It's not a business model that I would ever go into in the first place because it's so commoditized. What is differentiating you from the vape shop that could open up next door? You've got no USP. I mean, I'm not a vape smoker, so I don't understand the marketplace, but I know you smoke vape, Simon, and when we and some of our friends smoke them socially and things like that. And when we go and buy vapes, we just go anywhere that sells the right flavour. I'm not so sure that anybody's loyal to any particular brand here. So from that perspective, I think
it's just convenience.
It's a really bad business model anyway. You're highly commoditized, highly competing on price, and that's not a great model to be in. And you're on the high street.
I think it's a typical retail business. It's about location, i.e. convenience. It's about range. People want the range that's there, and then it's about the price. So, but I mean, it's like any retail business.
What's more convenient about a supermarket or a petrol station? And I think they're the people that you're competing with. And Amazon, you can buy this stuff I'm pretty sure you can buy this stuff on Amazon or online as well. So really, I'm not quite sure why people are opening vape shops on the high street. It's not a business model that I look at, and I think that is long-term sustainable.
Well, the guy that I was listening to, actually, he opened in an industrial estate and he's turning over £5,000 a week in his vape shop and in the industrial estate. He said it's brilliant. People can park outside. It's game changing compared to the high street. So actually, that's the model that works in retail, but it's no different to retail in general. It's out of town. It's, it's what we recognize, the model of retail that works now. So I've got a couple of other bits on here. So Radon Landlords operating as holiday lets. So this one came out of the blue as well. Yes. Looking at raising 300 million out of this. Again, all of these, I presume, are about raising the cash to help cut the income tax. But this is just about doing away with the mortgage interest relief that came on long-term lets quite a while ago. So people that operate their properties as a holiday let can still claim mortgage interest relief on it. And there's also an element of council tax and business rates, Claire, isn't there, about what they can do with them?
Yeah, so when you have a property that you rent out on a long-term basis to a tenant, if it's in your personal name, you can't deduct mortgage interest. And then you've got council tax, you pay that like on any residential property. But when you let it as a holiday let, that's classed as a trade. And therefore you don't pay council tax on the property, you pay business rates relief. But generally, because the rateable value of the property is below the thresholds, you don't pay any business rates. So you're in this situation where not only can you deduct mortgage interest, you're not paying council tax and you're not paying business rates, which is one of the reasons why service accommodation has been so popular and this side of the industry has boomed. Lots of people have bought holiday lets and things like that. And this is part of one of the reasons why rents have gone up so much, because so many landlords moved into serviced accommodation and holiday lets because it was much more profitable. So if they introduce this, the thinking is that they will remove the interest rate relief and they will reintroduce the need to pay council tax or business rates, which means that we're putting money back into local councils' pockets as well. So I actually think this is much needed. We've got rental property, and yeah, you kind of look at it and you think, should we've crunched the numbers and considered going into service accommodation because the profits are just so much higher. So I do think that this is much needed. Particularly the service accommodation industry is completely unregulated, and it just needs completely clamping down on, and it's too opportunistic. I think there's too much of an advantage in it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether I'd say it's needed or a good thing. It's just whack-a-mole, isn't it? You know, they've whacked the landlords in 2014 with that. Then interest rates have gone up. Landlords simply can't make a profit. You know, they're in negative, and they feel forced into either selling their property or doing something else with it. So for the time being, the something else was holiday lets, and they're just, you know, it's spilled out into that, and they're hoping to whack that mole. And I guarantee that on Wednesday, Jeremy Hunt will come out and he'll wrap it up as as he's the hero that's come out and he's pushing property back into the long-term tenancy market that's well needed, because it's massively, there's a massive shortage now. I mean, every time I put a rental property on the market at the moment, it is ridiculous. I mean, we're talking, you put it on for 24 hours, you get 30 applicants on it, you get people trying to bid you up on the rent. I mean, it's immoral. And it's just an example of the huge shortage we've now got in the rental sector that's been caused by policy change back in 2014.
But I think the expectation is that the interest rate relief will remain in a limited company. So I think that's really important to point out, because if you have buy-to-let in your personal name, you can't claim interest. But if you have buy-to-let in a limited company, you still can claim the interest relief.
Yeah.
So I actually think that this is a little bit like... back to that argument of zombie companies, should people be able to run a business and the profit come from tax breaks, or should you have to run a viable, profitable business and then be entitled to tax breaks? And it's like, which is first, the horse or the cart? And I think that this is encouraging. We've seen this push from encouraging landlords to become more regulated in limited companies, and I think this is just an evolution of that. I think if people are running viable holiday lets, they probably have a limited company anyway, and they're running it as a proper business, rather than these people that think, oh, I'll just rent out my second home and make some money from it. And I think that's exactly who this is targeting, is these second homeowners that have got a nice little cottage in Cornwall that rent it out when they're not there.
Yeah, I'd agree, and it's handy for them if it generates 300 million and they can put a certain good news spin behind it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a couple of other just last few bits to touch on. Again, these are more things that have not been mentioned but were mentioned quite dramatically in the last 6 months. So lots of talk about inheritance tax changes. They look to have been completely shelved now.
That was a stupid idea anyway. Let's face it. I mean,
absolutely.
It just I think like, what is it, like 4% of people will pay inheritance tax. I mean, you can always tell when something gets floated so far in advance of a statement that they are not sure how it's going to land with the general public, and they're leaking it to get public opinion. So I think it was quite obvious from the early leak, then coupled with the sort of outrage from the general public, that one was never going to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the final one is stamp duty on housing, and one that I'm very passionate about. It's a stupid tax. It's a restrictive tax. It stops the movement of people. It stops the movement of opportunity and jobs. It's something that, I mean, frankly, I think back when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, stamp duty was, I want to say, a flat 1% on everything. Don't quote me on that, but it was very low, and it was just a token gesture. We're now looking at 5%. You know, the second you go over that 250,000, it's 5% slab on everything. These are huge numbers for people. It looks like it's been shelved for this budget, from what I can see, potentially being pushed back to be addressed in the autumn statement right before the potential election. But again, it's just something that I think needs to be addressed.
But I'm not so sure. I don't know. There's a little bit of me that thinks this might be a nice little surprise in the budget, because...
The rabbit in the hat.
Yeah, because when you look at company insolvencies, there's obviously, it's been in the news that insolvencies has rocketed, but the vast majority of insolvencies are coming from businesses that are related to the housing market. So actually, a lot of it is construction and things like that. And because if the housing market isn't thriving, then the house builders slow down house building, and all of these industries connected to it, particularly in construction, really suffer. And that is where the vast majority of insolvencies are coming from. So I do think if they don't do something to sort of pep up the housing market a little bit, then I would be quite surprised. So it might not be stamp duty, but I just feel like there's going to be something, and it will probably be something ridiculous, like more 1% mortgages or something like that, which will make housing prices just go bonkers.
Yeah, financial support for first-time buyers. If you get that bottom of the market moving, then it starts to get the whole market moving. You're absolutely right, Claire, though. I mean, I see it when the market's moving very healthily. everything around you, every business around it just moves tremendously from, because people move into their home, the first thing they want to do is decorate it, do the repairs, buy a sofa, buy a new TV. Oh, and then they want to landscape the garden when the spring comes, so the landscapers will come out, and then they want to do the extension to it, and then they want, and it really fuels the economy. But again, we've had a very, very poor 18 months in housing. So again, that's sort of bleeding out into all of those industries.
Yeah. So I would be surprised if we don't see them do something to try and tackle company insolvencies. And I think this might be one of them.
Great. Well, that's all we've got on predictions for the budget this week so far. We'll be back in touch with you later in the week once we find out what actually comes out, and hopefully there's more there for small businesses, and we'll report back to you then. But let's move on now to this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra. So this week on Profit Cash Growth Extra, I'm going old school, and this week I want to talk about leafleting. Yes, hardcore printed leafleting. Claire, what do you think about leafleting?
I love leafleting too. I think in a digital world, when I get lumpy mail in the post, I always read it, especially if it's handwritten. And actually, if I had a little button that could do like a round of applause and a cheer right now, I'd be pressing it, because you have utilised leafleting to become the market leader in your industry, haven't you? So you've got an... Oh.
Is that what you were looking for?
That is what I was looking for, yeah. So, Simon, you've got an estate agent, haven't you? And you have been battling for number one position for a couple of years now. And you... For 7 years. And you have finally got there, and that has been through the power of leafleting. So tell us a little bit about what you did.
Well, I leafleted people's houses. When we launched the business, we leafleted with a big launch offer, and it's a very expensive marketing channel, is what I would say. And I think a few years into the business, as it was moving, we got sucked into using digital marketing and spending huge amounts of money going to Mr. Zuckerberg and the other fellas at Google. And we still do that. But as the business has grown, we've just felt that there's a room to turn on, up the marketing budget and actually add leafleting back into the mix. And a little bit of me's kicking myself that we didn't do it earlier, if I'm honest, because it's been really, really strong in sort of getting the brand in front of people. I think, 7 years on, I think that the lack of leaflets going through people's doors is what got us interested. Most of our competitors had stopped doing it through the downturn in the last 18 months as they've cut marketing budgets. You get very little. I mean, I was reading a fantastic article from a guy. He launched, do you know the home business that repairs your boilers and things called HomeServe?
Yeah.
It's a bit like it's a competitor for kind of the British Gas service. So he said that when he launched HomeServe, the first thing he did was send out 1,000 letter mail shots to see if he'd get any response to the services on a trial. And he had 38 responses from the 1,000 letters, and the rest is history, so to speak. He's a big advocate of printed material. He said printed material can add an air of luxury and tangibility in a non-tangible world. The same cannot be said for the avalanche of marketing emails that are deleted, unread, or dumped into my spam. And I think that really sums it up, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think definitely, like you say, that we're so tuned into digital stuff now that everything just goes into spam, delete. You've got your spam filters on your email. So to get through to that person is really difficult. And I know you, not only do you do leafleting, but you also do more direct mail as well, don't you? And you always I really recognise your mail because it's always in bright green envelopes and it's handwritten and it's got a little sheep stamp on the front of it because that's your company logo. So you've got to find that way to stand out, and you always put a Kit Kat in there, don't you? And it's like, have a break, sit
Kit Kat
down,
and a tea bag.
So
we've got your back. Have a cuppa.
Yeah, and just that lumpy mail. I always remember when I worked in corporate, and I got a card in the post, and it was bloody phenomenal. It was like a gorilla. You opened it up, and it growled at me, and the gorilla was absolutely nothing to do with the company. That I can't even remember what the company was writing to me for, but I had that card on my desk for probably about 5 years. And if somebody had come to me and said, "Oh, do you know a company that does?" 100%, I would have been like, "Yeah, I do. Look at this gorilla card." And everybody that came to my office, I was like, "Oh my God, look at my gorilla card," because it was just brilliant. So yeah, lumpy mail and cool things that people like, not boring stuff like post-it notes and pens and calendars and all of that kind of stuff, because just everybody's doing that. You've got to find something to be different. But yeah, definitely.
I think it's a real secret weapon today, because we've gone so digital. The things that have always worked will be the things that always do work. And there's just some data here to back this up. So a study by the Data and Marketing Association said that 70% of consumers feel that direct mail is more personal than online interactions, with a response rate that is 40 times higher. That's a staggering number. Neuroscientists have found that direct mail is easier to process mentally than email. Engagement is longer, and there's an astonishing 70% increase in brand recall.
Yeah, and it was Bowden, wasn't it? They cited the fact that they stopped printing and sending out their catalogue. They went from like a £22 million profit to making a loss. And it was all down to them stopping their mailing. So yeah, if you are a business that has stopped using mail, I'd really encourage you to reconsider it again, because it can be incredibly powerful. And in terms of bang for your buck, we have run the statistics in our business, and we genuinely believe, because we've got the data to back it up, that direct mail and leafleting brings far more return for pound spent versus online advertising such as Facebook ads and Google.
Yep, and Bowden actually called himself a nitwit for ditching his catalogue delivery. I think that I'm going to call myself a nitwit for turning off my leafleting. I'm so glad that I turned it back on. So anyway, thanks for joining us for this week's podcast. As always, you can find Claire and Claire's business at profitcashgrowth.com. If you want to do the self-assessment, it's free, 20 questions to find out what you don't know about financial analysis in your business. I think Claire's got a few more bits to talk to you about.
Yes, because I am running a promotion this week. I am giving away 5 free business reviews. 3 of them have already gone. I'm speaking to one person about booking, so you will have to be quick if you would like the one that is spare at the moment. But you get a completely free review of your accounts and your business. I'll give you some insights into where I think you might be able to increase your profits or your cash flow, or where you've got opportunities to grow your business. It's completely free. All you've got to do is give me access to your bookkeeping system like Xero or Sage. So if anybody is interested in taking me up on that offer, I promise there will be no awkward upsell at the end of it. Just drop me an email at Claire, CLAIRE at profitcashgrowth.com.
Yeah, genuinely an amazing offer, guys. Claire, finance director and qualified chartered accountant by CIMA. This is a great opportunity for her to, go through your accounts and pick out some interesting stuff and give you a full report on the things that you could do to improve your cash flow and improve your profits and ultimately grow your business. We'll see you guys on Thursday for the budget review.